The anointed ones, welcome. What if I told you that the greatest trick played wasn't by the devil, but by those closest to you? The ones who convinced you that they weren't the villains in your story? That gut feeling you had, that unease that something was off, wasn't just a passing thought. It was the truth breaking through the cracks. They didn't just make mistakes, they planned to hurt you. They manipulated, deceived, and twisted their reality to make you believe that you were the problem. As unsettling as this may feel, you're not alone. Research shows that toxic family dynamics can leave psychological scars as deep as the ones inflicted in war zones. They may not have fired bullets, but they launched emotional grenades and disguised them as care. Your pain wasn't an accident. It was a calculated effort to keep you in line, to make you doubt your worth, to make you question your every move. But here's the thing. Elon Musk divorced for you. Not because he believed in the lies of those who sought to control, but because he recognized the cost of living in a toxic system. He saw the game being played, and just like you, he chose to break free, to rise above the manipulations. His own personal sacrifice serves as a reminder that sometimes breaking away from what holds us down is the only way to truly find ourselves. The curtain is being pulled back, and the truth is revealed. You were never the problem. You were always the one with the power. The plan to keep you bound is falling apart, and you, the chosen one, will walk away from it all, stronger, clearer, and free. First of all, you have been their emotional dump from birth. They had previously determined that you would be the emotional dump from the time of your birth. They threw all of their anger, failure, and insecurity onto you, hoping you would take it all in like a sponge. They never recognized you as a unique person with feelings, goals, and challenges of your own. When their own lives didn't measure up, they could blame you as their outlet. What's the worst? You were conditioned to accept it as the usual. The casual remarks, the passive-aggressive ones, the way they would sigh in displeasure over things that had nothing to do with you. It all began quietly. Then, as you grew older, the emotional burden on you increased. You somehow took the blame for their poor days. You were burdened by their shortcomings. They made sure you felt more smaller each time they felt helpless. They took control of you when they were unable to take charge of their own life. They discovered methods to distort reality and make you feel bad about things that didn't affect you. You were too much of a burden if they were having financial difficulties. You were too sensitive or too challenging, which is why their relationships were failing. The pattern was consistent. You were made the scapegoat if things didn't go their way. The most perverse aspect is that they pretended to be helping you. They persuaded you that tolerating their abuse made you strong and that bearing their suffering was a sign of love. However, it didn't. In ways they never had to go through themselves, it shattered you. You took the burden for them, so they walked lighter. They deceived you into believing that you were the issue if you attempted to resist, or ask why you were the only one going through hardship. Since you would understand that their anguish was never yours to bear in the first place, they never intended you to see the truth. They would no longer have the authority over you that they never should have in the first place, once you let it go. Second, you were unaware that they functioned like a cult. You were unaware that they operated the whole family like a cult. Unspoken but unquestionable were the unbreakable rules. Follow without question. Never question authority. And whatever occurs inside the group remains within the group. It was a structure created to keep you in check, not a family based on love or support. You became a danger the instant you began to think independently and to challenge their actions. They need power over you, and they used fear, deception, and seclusion to keep it that way, much as cults do. They were in charge of the story, determining what was and wasn't true. If you ever attempted to inform someone about their abuse, you were either told you were being dramatic, ignored, or mocked. Even when you sensed something was wrong, you persuaded yourself that it was all in your brain, because they made sure you questioned your own reality. They dominated your self-perception. Because an independent mind is a dangerous mind, you were not let to be yourself. Instead, they labeled you as the one who constantly made trouble, the sensitive one, the ungrateful one, and the troublemaker. They wouldn't have to confront the fact that they were the ones destroying you, if they could make you believe that you were the issue. They frightened as you began to move away. Because compliance equaled love in their universe, they intensified the guilt trips, the silent treatments, and the theatrical breakdowns about how you've changed. They perceived it as a betrayal the minute you stopped obeying, not because they cared about you, but because they had to relinquish power over you in order to maintain control over the system as a whole. You never belonged to a true family. Instead, you were a member of a well-planned hierarchy in which you remained tiny and they remained in control. However, as soon as you began to awaken, the whole delusion began to fall apart, and they knew that you would eventually realize the reality, that you were never one of them in the first place. Breaking free was always your destiny. Thirdly, the sacrifice that kept the group together was you. You were sacrificed in addition to being abused. Your pain wasn't unintentional or incidental. It was required to ensure the comfort of the others. Every poisonous group or dysfunctional family needs a scapegoat, someone who bears the brunt of the criticism so that everyone else may act as if nothing is wrong. You were that person. They used you as a conduit for their own unhealed wounds, focusing their whole dynamic on your suffering. You were the diversion whenever someone in the family faltered. They turned their ire on you when things became tense. Not only did they need someone to place the blame on, but they also needed you to do it, so they wouldn't have to face their own failings. They were unable to confront themselves because of your difficulties. You were the scapegoat they needed. They never really helped you because of this. The system would fall apart if you began to prosper, heal, or break free. They would have to examine their own dysfunction if you didn't take on the role of the black sheep. They undermined you at every opportunity because of this. They made fun of all your dreams. They soured with every happy occasion. They had to stop you from prospering. They could never rejoice in the thought of you succeeding. The most perverse aspect, they persuaded themselves that they were decent people, that their treatment of you was acceptable, and that you were to blame for their need to be cruel. They never questioned the deception since they had each other to support it. But they knew in their hearts. They were aware that they would have to confront the reality of who they were without you. They relied on your suffering rather than just causing you grief. Because the illusion they created around you disintegrates the instant you take control, they are more afraid of your freedom than anything else. They are left with the one thing they have been avoiding all their lives, self, in the absence of you to shoulder the responsibility. Fourth, they never wanted you to realize that you were the most intelligent person in the room. From the start, they were fully aware of your identity. Nobody else ventured to ask the questions you did, and you were the one who saw through the gaps. You stood out because you had a mindset that others didn't have. That scared them because you would outgrow them if you ever knew how smart, perceptive, and strong you were. They couldn't allow it to occur. They broke you down because that was the only thing they could do. They made sure you doubted every idea, choice, and instinct by constantly criticizing you. It was about teaching you to think you were less than you really were, not about giving you advice. They ridiculed your ideas, dissected your IQ, and pretended that nothing you said was important or funny. As if it weren't enough, they deliberately undermined your self-esteem. They misled you into thinking you were the issue, made you feel bad for being too intelligent, and treated your achievements as if they were nothing. Convincing you that you were mistaken was part of the plan to keep you from realizing that you were correct. The irony is that it became more clear that they saw you as a danger the more they attempted to minimize you. Had you been just ordinary, they wouldn't have gone to such lengths. They were making fun of you because they felt inferior to you, not because of you. They were anxious to maintain you in a position where they could manipulate you because of their own fears. What they didn't anticipate, however, is that one day you'll wake up, begin to piece everything together, and realize that their views, judgments, and manipulations weren't facts, truths, or realities. They understood deep down that you were everything, so they tried to persuade you that you were nothing for years. The fifth is that they unraveled more the more you healed. They didn't think you would recover. The screenplay they gave you, in which you were the issue, the failure, and the one who never quite measured up, was meant to keep you entrenched in their thoughts indefinitely. However, their whole universe began to break apart the minute you began to awaken, challenge the narrative, and regain your power because your healing revealed them, not just changed you. They depended on your suffering for years to maintain their delusions. They had someone to point the finger at, someone to compare themselves to, and someone to blame while you were suffering. However, the minute you began to rise, the basis of their reality began to fall apart. They had no place to hide from their own dysfunction if you weren't the scapegoat. They struck out for that reason. They attacked you because you were correct, not because you were mistaken. They wanted you to be shattered because if you were complete, they would have to acknowledge that it was always about them and the falsehoods they had lived their life on, not about you. So they attempted to drag you back, which is what desperate people do. The last-ditch attempts to keep you in the cycle included guilt trips, smear campaigns, and an unexpected concern for your welfare. They unraveled when that failed. Without you bearing the burden of their dysfunction, the same individuals who had before seemed to be in charge began behaving irrationally, chaotically, and even pitifully. Since your recovery demonstrated that they could have also recovered but choose not to, they wanted you to remain injured. For someone who is in denial, nothing is more terrible than the person they attempted to destroy who refuses to remain broken. The sixth is that they privately appreciated you but were unable to express it. That was just a front they put up to conceal the truth. They never really disliked you. They adored you, but adoration from individuals like them takes the shape of control, sabotage, and unrelenting criticism rather than respect or support. Because acknowledging that they looked up to you would imply that they were not as strong as they made themselves out to be. They saw a quality in you that they did not possess. Perhaps it was your brilliance, strength, and resilience in the face of their best efforts to shatter you. Perhaps it was the natural way you drew others to you, the genuine way you conducted yourself that they could never match. They were angry with you for whatever it was. They made it their goal to destroy you rather than improve themselves. That's why they didn't approve of anything you ever accomplished. There was constant movement in the goalposts. They tried to make you feel insignificant by picking on you more and more as you achieved success. Since you would understand you never needed their approval in the first place, they couldn't afford for you to know how magnificent you are. But they couldn't resist copying you. They imitated the same characteristics that they made fun of you for. Suddenly, they were attempting to perform the exact things they had argued were foolish or futile. They desired what you have, but they were unable to accept that you were the source of it. Thus, they seemed to be superior while stealing bits and pieces of you all. Ironically, their animosity was really unsaid adoration that had been turned into resentment. Instead of rising with you, they decided to bring you down. Even if they wanted, they could be as free as you. Because in their perspective, acknowledging their admiration for you would be tantamount to admitting that they were mistaken about you from the beginning, and their pride would never be able to bear that reality. Seventh, they were aware of your selection before you were. They knew who you were before you ever did. They could feel it, a force, a brightness, an energy that made you unique. You were destined, not simply different. That frightened them because you were destined for something better in a world where they had settled for mediocrity. Their goal became evident as soon as they realized that. They had to stop you before you ever used your ability. They weren't simply harsh on you because they wanted the best for you. They weren't just criticizing you for the pleasure of criticizing. No, it was deliberate. They wanted you to have self-doubt. It was all part of the plan. Every insult, every obstacle, every time they made you feel inadequate. They saw your potential long before you did, and they knew that they would no longer be able to control you if you ever realized it. They assaulted you in ways that went beyond simple insults because of this. They targeted your self-esteem, confidence, and identity. They caused you to doubt your skills, your sense of intuition, and even how you saw the world. They sowed doubt so thoroughly that you were unable to see yourself properly for years, since you would then understand that you were the danger and never the issue. Before you learned you were indestructible, they sought to break you. Before you found your way, they wanted you lost. Because they knew there would be no stopping you once you did. They panicked the once you realized who you were. Your ability to see through the facade had fulfilled their worst nightmare. They were aware that you were selected before you were, and their efforts to prevent you from moving on demonstrated their greater faith in your abilities than you ever did. However, now that you are aware of it as well, everything is different. The eighth is that they cleansed their own darkness by using you as a sin eater. You were always the sin eater, the one selected by their collective timidity rather than by chance. You were never just the black sheep. The load, the humiliation, and the unsolved traumas that no one else wants to deal with are invariably assigned to one individual in toxic families and communities. You were that person. They ensured it. It wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't random. They picked you because they had a gut feeling that you could handle the pressure. They took advantage of their strength rather than appreciating it. The penalties were always put on your shoulders if they failed or made a mistake. You turned, became their scapegoat, their emotional dump, and the one who took on the darkness they were unable to confront. They didn't have to hold themselves responsible. Therefore, they never really did. It was you who was held accountable. They left feeling lighter, as if your suffering had purified them. But you were the one who suffered. They repeated the same procedure over and over again. After wronging you, they fabricated the story to make you feel worse. After injuring you, they persuaded themselves that you were deserving of it. They benefited from your pain since they were spared from facing their own issues as long as you were having difficulties. When you eventually began to buckle beneath the weight, what did they do? Did they express regret? Were they aware of the harm? No. They made fun of you for it. They pretended not to understand why you were having difficulties in the first place and accused you of being weak, theatrical, and too sensitive. Since acknowledging the reality would entail acknowledging that they were the issue from the beginning. What they didn't anticipate, however, is that you wouldn't remain their sacrifice indefinitely. The system began to fall apart as soon as you recognized what they had done. In order to maintain their illusion, they need you to remain shattered. Now, however, you recognize it for what it is. They are forced to confront the darkness they have fled from their whole lives if you don't fulfill that duty. The ninth is that they feared your power over other people. They were aware of your impact, something they never had. It's the sort that's natural, the kind that makes people listen, think again, and wake up. Not the kind that comes from status or manipulation. Long before you ever realized it in yourself, they saw it in you, and it scared them. Because if you ever understood the power you had, you would not only liberate yourself, but also encourage others to follow in your footsteps. They put a lot of effort into silencing you for that reason. They had to keep you secluded, control your energies, and get you to doubt every aspect of who you were. They portrayed you as unstable, challenging, or rebellious, not because it was accurate, but because they didn't want other people to take you seriously if they thought so. They were worried that the whole dynamic would change if people really saw you for who you were. It was more important to keep everyone else sleeping than it was to keep you little. People that are toxic flourish in settings where no one challenges anything. To prevent others from beginning to see through the gaps as well, they required you to question yourself. Because as you began to break free, it made everyone around you face a reality they weren't prepared for. They responded so violently when you began to develop, heal, and live out your mission because of this. The smear efforts became more frantic, and the assaults more savage. It was always about halting the impact you might make, not stopping you. They knew that you would reveal the game they had been playing all along if you ever stood in your full authority. What they didn't anticipate, however, is that the very thing they dreaded is now occurring. People are starting to awaken. They're losing their hold. It becomes more clear that you were always the solution and never the issue, no matter how much they attempt to stifle you. 10th, their greatest nightmare is your success. They told themselves that lie to go to sleep at night, but they never really questioned you. They secretly understood that you were unique because of your brilliance, talent, fortitude, and vision, which is precisely why they put so much effort into keeping you down. Because it would reveal all they had done to prevent you from it if you ever succeeded. Not only was your victory a personal triumph, but it also ran counter to the story they told about you. You were the issue, the failure, the one who would never amount to anything they told themselves and everyone else for years. In this manner, they would never have to answer for their treatment of you. But that whole scenario unravels the minute you begin to thrive. They always managed to pull you back whenever you made a step forward because of this. They attempted to persuade you that success wasn't for people like you, minimized your achievements, or disregarded your diligence. They knew you were competent, so it wasn't a question of whether you were. Making sure you didn't realize it was important because the moment you did, you would abandon them, and they couldn't take it. Their comfort zone was your failure. They were able to feel better about themselves, defend their behavior, and carry on the cycle guilt-free. However, your success? They were unable to avoid that mirror. It made them realize that they were the only thing preventing you from moving forward all those years, which is a reality they were unwilling to acknowledge. The thing they didn't anticipate, however, is that you're still succeeding. You're rising in spite of everything in them. There is nothing more frightening to them than having to face the fact that the person they attempted to break is outgrowing them in every aspect.